Shine is the doomed yaoi that I have been looking for. This is a very, 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 very good BL. At least I'm finding it to be an amazing BL so far, and it has probably one of the most tragic in the making second couples I've seen in a while. I love Mile and Apple from KinnPorsche, and I was really curious to see what their next major project from Beyond a Cloud would be, and Shine really is breathtaking in a lot of ways. There's a lot of dynamics to discuss in this show that even though it is a BL, it's being marketed more than that. It is an LGBTQ plus story that has the backdrop of a lot of socio-political movements, and I really want to delve into a lot more in this podcast. I'm Monique. I am the host of Off by Purple Heart podcast, where I talk to you about K-dramas, C-dramas, BTS, and so much more. And so much more includes BLs, even though this show, Shine, hasn't really been marketed as a BL. This is more just a story that happens to just feature queer people, queer life experiences in a very political atmosphere that was wrought with a lot of tension. I think Shine just looks very cinematic. You can tell a lot of money was put into it, but technically a lot of Beyond Cloud productions, they do look extremely good because they take quite a bit of time to film and to bring together. They do not just pump out BLs at a drop of a hat, and that's probably to the production company's strength, even though there are criticism to be had. But Shine, I had to talk about it for a wee bit because it just has so much great stuff going for it, and I'm really hoping that it will stick the landing in the final episodes. There's not a lot of episodes to give to us, but they are essentially like hour-long movies. So I want to talk about, first of all, just Mile and Apple and seeing them on my screen again. I adore these two. I think they have phenomenal chemistry. They have phenomenal on-screen presence. And Apple is quite literally one of the most beautiful men I've ever seen in my life. You know, Mile, he ain't bad to look at either. And I know that sounds really superficial, but I just had to get that out. Otherwise, it would just drive me crazy. Like, they're so magnetic together. And I don't want this just to be about me thirsting, because they both have great talents. And you could say a lot of things about KinnPorsche, but I think stylistically it was a really great production. I was completely ensnared in it, and it's one of those BLs that promised itself to be gritty, full of tension, and it didn't shy away from the violence of the world they were trying to bring out. And I really expected a lot of great things out of Shine, and I'm really glad I got into it. Victor, Trin, and Tanwa are like the first of the main characters that I really want to focus in on. And particularly Trin, who is portrayed by Apple, and his kind of ideology coming into the show, and he has a lot of naivete. The show is based in 1969 to 1971, that time period, which the socio-political economics of it is a lot, and there's a lot of political commentary in this show, and I appreciate that the show is finding a great balance with it. At least I find the pacing is really good, and I'm enjoying just everything unfolding as it should. I think with Trin's character in particular, and his ideology and how it's shaped and how he moves, was a really great departure for Apple, completely different from, you know, Porsche from KinnPorsche, and his more lackadaisical, funny slapstick type humor. I feel like him playing the more straight-laced type character that doesn't really have a lot of, what word am I looking for? He doesn't have a lot of experience in the world. He is a professor in the show, and we do see that he had a relationship with a woman, and it was unfortunately cut short, and she was involved in some riots and some protesting, which essentially cost her life. And unfortunately, that has kind of shaped a lot of Trin's worldview, and he is looking for change in Thailand. He's looking for great change, but he does not want to do it through the vehicle of violent protest, and through education and understanding and working alongside the government. He believes that he can bring about effective change needed. And I think bringing in Victor at first as a not necessarily an antagonistic character, but as like a foil to his ideology and how he kind of looks at things in a way that would scream a little bit of naivete, I guess. But I like the push and pull of Trin and Victor in particular, at least in the first couple of episodes, mainly because I actually agree with both their ideologies to a certain extent. Not necessarily that you shouldn't, harshly judge rich people, and there's a lot of good in rich, and there's a lot of good in poor, and that type of rhetoric that seems to keep coming up in the show. Like, I don't really want to get into my feelings about the rich ruling class, but in the context of the show, I do kind of see where both parties are coming from, and I would more lean towards Victor's ideology, but his arrogance as well, and his youth, and his very brash and very brusque way of just going headfirst into things. It kind of fits the fact that he's a really young teen and he's in college and his worldview is expanding, and him and his friend group is interesting. And I think bringing in Tanwa, and who's played by Mile, has as the hippie, as the carefree, lovable, dorky kind of guy that has a lot of mommy wounds and has a lot of inner turmoil, but ultimately brings out a side of Trin where he can truly kind of relax and be more in touch with himself, and helping to discover his sexuality, and to kind of bring him out of his shell a little bit more and get him to have some form of joy and peace in his life, and bring about just some soothing to a lot of the trauma that is underneath in Trin's character. So I think the interplay of the three of them is really fun, and it's kind of nice to take in their dynamic. I think Mile and Apple, their chemistry has always been really good, and I think the chemistry really excels here as well. I just enjoy seeing them visually on screen, especially in episode 4. I have not watched episode 5 yet. Oh God, but I'm looking forward to it. Oh, I'm looking forward to so much. There's so many behind the scenes stuff that looks absolutely just breathtaking, but I really like interplay of these three characters, balancing out Victor's disillusionment about the government, his propensity for violence along with his friends, but them being on the right side of history, and them wanting so much for change, and knowing and feeling that from a narrative perspective, things are not going to end very well for Victor and his gang. Like, I feel like every time Victor comes on a screen, there's like that death bell that's kind of ringing in the background, especially in some of the lines that they gave him in episode 4, the really introspective look that him and Trin had together about his future. And maybe it shouldn't just be about him being an activist and fighting for change, but also tapping into his skill set as a writer that he obviously takes from his father, and having a career as someone that's really prolific and could be an amazing writer and could be a journalist, and could find a way to find a good, healthy balance between journalistic integrity and activism and being creative, and not having to necessarily put your life on the line. But I think that biting kind of commentary that he gives, and he forces Trin to kind of re-examine his worldview, is fun. And then Tanwa in the background as well, kind of opening up Trin to more of just being free and having peace in his heart, and opening himself up to love, and of course the discovery of his sexuality. I think all that stuff is really fascinating as far as that dynamic between the three of them. The second couple though is where I'm really, really at. I think from the very first moment that they interacted on screen, I was like, yeah, that's doomed Yaoi if I ever saw it. There is absolutely no way in hell this is working out. I find their dynamic so fascinating because of the time period they're in, that it makes it very, at least for me, I'm very empathetic towards them as men that have to hide their sexuality. The military guy, the cousin of Trin's character, I think him and his entire backstory, the fact that those in power and in control actually took away his lover, that we saw in the first episode, that his lover was kind of, it was insinuated that they killed him off because of his military ranking and his position of power, and then having like his commanding officer essentially tell him, yeah, you're gonna marry my daughter and you're gonna toe the line. And him being trapped in this marriage, which he clearly isn't really present for, and his wife is very astute and knows exactly what the hell is going on, but hasn't come forth with it yet. I don't think she knows about the cheating necessarily, but I do know that she absolutely knows, and she had to have known what was going on going to this marriage. I really hope that she wasn't coming into this marriage completely thinking that he fell in love with her and just going, and then just thinking this was like an organic love story. I don't think that is. I think she must have known, but still had hoped with time that her and her husband could still come together and be on the same page. And I think that tragicness in itself is really sad. I can't imagine being trapped in the closet, being forced into a marriage that I did not want, and having just having the knowledge present in my mind all the time that my first love, or someone that I had true love with, was murdered essentially from my wife's father. That would I don't know, like, how you'd get up out of bed in the morning. And then having a journalist and a reporter who's also in a relationship that I think would be politically very good for him. As a journalist, it seems like his girlfriend or fiance has a very powerful, rich family, but they're extremely disapproving of him, and they constantly take hot shots at him, and him feeling a certain kind of way about it. I don't blame him, and I feel that building tension really does make for really compelling television. But the most compelling thing to me is how they had come together. I think the second couple, them having this rendezvous in the newspaper where they're exchanging messages back and forth and using particular passages from literature to kind of tap into their romantic developing feelings, tickles the best part of my brain as someone that absolutely engorges on romantic media. And I think there's not a more romantic backdrop than secret messaging through letters, and then having everyone kind of read and kind of giggle and gossip and imagine the two star-crossed lovers that are sending these messages back and forth. I think that is such an enticing angle. Having that then progress to them kind of exchanging coordinates with one another, and having these little rendezvous in the library after dusk when it's all alone, when they're all alone, and just the magical lighting of it is remarkable. I think the fact that they started off and it as a more enemies to lovers type shift, and then, you know, seeing their exchanges at first through press conferences, and you could feel like that romantic chemistry and tension, and then coming together in that first very climactic scene, which is why it's amazing watching the orchestral version of Shine. The uncut versions, incredible. But having those like little passionate rendezvous, and then having that really big climactic moment when they first got together, sensational. Their chemistry is so powerful. The two actors, they're absolutely dynamite together. I can't stand it how good the chemistry is. And as I said, I haven't watched episode 5 yet, but I know things come to a head, and there's already cracks in the relationship, and you can see that as passionate as they are, it is so doomed to fail. Not even just because of the time period and the circumstances that got them together, but it just has that ominous feel hanging over their heads, kind of like how Victor's character always has that ominous cloud over his head as well. I find just like the scene where they come together and they're making out, and I believe Krailert, he was looking over Naran's shoulder, and he happened to see that, you know, he's still investigating him, and he's kind of giving him kind of that look like, oh, interesting. And Naran's kind of brushing it off, kind of a thing. The entire conspiracy with like the power plant and all the political machinations tied to that, and the fact that, you know, Naran's journalistic integrity is kind of coming into question because he was such a spitfire on Krailert's ass, and then as they kind of segue into their relationship, he is becoming softer towards him, but still has to investigate him and the military, and that kind of conflict and push and pull, which kind of runs parallel with Victor's storyline as well, because with the later episodes, we then get to see that Victor is starting to have a crush on Trin. Like, it started off him just kind of looking at him like, you're a complete airhead. You have your head up in the clouds. You're in this little ivory tower. You think you know what you're talking about. You don't know what the hell you're talking about at all. And then him starting to slowly soften towards him and not have that same bite that he did, because he has this like boyish crush on him now, even though it's not going to go anywhere, nor should it. I really would hope that they wouldn't take it there in this show, because they've been crafting such a beautiful thing with Trin and Tanwa that I highly doubt it. And I have a feeling Trin is going to have to put Victor in his place. But I just find the parallels of those two characters, how Victor and Naran kind of navigate their little, you know, romantic side plots. I think that's interesting as well. But there's just like so much to chew with this show. I will say the few things that kind of have me scratching my head, there's like these weird little interludes here and there. There was like that whole thing with Yoko Ono in episode 4, which I had a hard time understanding what the point of that scene was. I think I wish that the female characters were used a little bit more. I mean, the two prominent female characters that we have are women that are essentially being cheated on, and I totally empathize with the second couple, so it's not me being derisive towards them, but it's a shame that the female characters are kind of like floating in the background. But at least with the military wife and that subordinate that seems to be like circling around her, that seems like it's going to turn into a thing. But I would like a little bit more focus, like for example on the hotel owner. I thought she was interesting. Her connection with Tanwa is interesting, and I'm wondering like how is she going to fit into the bigger picture of the storyline going forward. And I think as far as the students are concerned, the students are kind of annoying. Like the best friend in particular, Victor, that is like constantly in Trin's face and has that like sneering personality, kind of annoys me. But it is going to be good conflict, because I definitely think there's going to come to a point where Trin is going to be in very similar circumstance like he was with his girlfriend in the past, and the rising tension and protests. And I think this time with the knowledge and his expanding ideology is probably going to be that much more crushing to Trin going forward. But I do like the backstory that was given to Tanwa and his mother and his suspicions surrounding her death. I think that's going to be an interesting thread to untangle, because I'm like, how long are they going to continue with this hippy dippy head up in the clouds kind of a thing with Miles' character? Even though there was that brief interaction with him and his father to show just how bitterly tense their relationship is, and that they're kind of estranged in a way. So I'm really looking towards things coming ahead. But the second couple in particular, their love story is gorgeous. The NC scenes are crazy, ripe with chemistry. That kind of chemistry is star making in the, it's completely phenomenal. So let me know your thoughts about Shine. How are you finding the show going forward thus far? Is there anything that you're wanting to see more of? Or there's things that you think the show should be expanding on more? How do you find the pacing? I find the pacing, at least for right now, pretty good. I haven't been bored yet. And from what I can tell from the previous episode 5, which I'm dying to get off of camera right now and stop filming so I can go watch it, I think there's a lot of good things coming towards, but let me know your thoughts. This is kind of rambled and all over the place, but I just knew I just had to do a podcast highlighting Shine because I think it is great work. And I think Mile and Apple have another hit on their hands. But yes, let me know your thoughts if you're watching the YouTube format of this podcast. If you're listening or watching via Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please let me know your thoughts as well. Till the next episode.